Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Physicist tea and let's join the revolution. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am your host, Amanda Panacea, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing a really incredible human named Dan Neuffer. He is the founder of ANS REWIRE.com. ANS stands for Autonomic Nervous System, and this program has been used in over 60 countries for people dealing with fibromyalgia, ME, CFS, POTS, and multiple chemical sensitivities, alongside with also working with their medical doctors. He suffered himself with these illnesses for about 7 years and formed the hypothesis that there's no way all these different things were going wrong. It has to have to do with the brain. And so as a former physicist, he used his scientific training to research all of these different conditions and put this program together himself as he was still suffering. So this is a little bit lengthier of a podcast. It was so long that my camera actually lost power at the end, so I go black. But it was just really fascinating to hear him speak, and I really appreciated the long form content here. So I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Let's start the revolution. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Amanda Panacea, and this is the Healer Revolution podcast. I am really excited today to introduce my new friend, Dan Neuffer. He is the founder of ANS REWIRE, and he has a really incredible story to share with you all. So hi, Dan. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to connect with you.
Yes, definitely. And you are in Australia, so our time zone difference is really extreme. So thank you for figuring it out with me.
Yes. We are 16 hours ahead in one way and many years ahead, many years behind in many other ways, I was going to say. But yes, it's a bit of an awkward time difference. But great to talk to you.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you could just be as, detailed as you want, I would love to hear your story of how you went through chronic illness and then your recovery. And then later on, we can get into like what your program is and how we can get involved in that.
Oh, it's a long story,
I like hearing them. I know other people do too.
Yeah. I mean, how does one summarize that? I guess my story really started probably a year and a half before I got sick. Mm-hmm. And my son was born, and it was a pretty rough experience. My wife had to go in for an emergency cesarean. She had a condition called HELLP syndrome. And there was a little bit of not the best care, let's say. She ended up basically nearly bleeding to death afterwards. And she had to go in for 3 life-saving operations within about 24 hours. And I think it was after the second, on the third one, we actually had to say goodbye.
Oh, wow. Because
they already said, well, we've already done this. We don't really know what else we can do. So that was a pretty rough experience. She had to, at one stage, she had like no blood pressure. Like they couldn't measure the blood pressure. And then, some hours later, her blood pressure was something like 180 on 130 or something ridiculous like this. So she was ready to stroke, I remember being in the intensive care, helping the intensive care nurses, correctly calculate the amount of magnesium that they were supposed to administer to bring the blood pressure down. And no medical training, but I had a background in science as a physicist. So, I'll crunch whatever numbers you give me. And Yeah, that was a crazy time, and I think we both ended up with some form of PTSD. Really, from that. Remember afterwards, walking down the road at work and getting flashbacks and all this kind of thing, and which is kind of strange. You see that in the movies, how people have those flashbacks, but it actually happens just like that. Somehow you're still able to walk, yet you're not even there. Yeah, it's like you're in two places at once. Very strange. And but stuff happens, right? That happens to everyone. We think we're the only ones, but really, everyone goes through something rough, sooner or later. And I got over the PTSD. I had some therapy, not the ideal therapy for this kind of thing, but it was good enough. It got me through. Went to get back with my life. I had some irritable bowel syndrome, so that was the first signal. It's often considered to be a different condition, but I really think it's literally the identical condition, just different symptoms. And then I tried to clean up my diet, started exercising. Life was good. We were really back to normal about 18 months later. And one of the colleagues in my office, her husband got chickenpox. I'm like, have I been vaccinated for chickenpox? I don't know if I've been vaccinated for chickenpox. No idea. Anyway, I didn't want to drag anything home. I was already a bit vigilant. I didn't want any dramas at home, sickness, young child. So I thought I'll just go get the vaccine. You're supposed to have 2 shots. I never got the second shot. I only got the first shot because about, I don't know exactly how long, maybe 2 days or 3 days after the shot, I was walking along and with my colleagues, and I couldn't keep up. Just a stroll at lunchtime, and they're like, I'm like, I can't do it. I can't walk that fast. And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? And that's when it happened. Now, I never put it down to the vaccine because I know it happened straight after, but I never connected the two. And it's important to recognize that I'm not saying that the vaccine caused it. What I'm saying is it was triggered by the vaccine. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a very different thing. The vaccine was just one component of everything. And what a vaccine is supposed to do, it's supposed to be stressing you. It's supposed to kind of give you an illness reaction, if you like. That's the whole purpose of a vaccine. So it did its job, but I was not in a physiological or neurological state where my body was able to process that. So anyway, I went to doctors, the usual story, doctor hopping. Now I could have tried and summarize the next 7 years so that I don't speak to you for the next 7 hours. In essence, I went from doctor to doctor. They told me there was a virus in the beginning, unknown virus maybe. And that's what it always felt like, because I get these bouts of like fever, flu-like symptoms, exhaustion, headaches, all this kind of thing. I also started to get a rash across my chest and neck just before I'd get a flare-up. And I thought, it must be some virus. I'd gone to all the doctors. First you're sick for a week, and then it's like 10 days. You're like, what's wrong with me? And then you sort of get better, and you think, okay, I'm getting better. But you don't really get better. And then suddenly you get sick again. And that's when the confusion is, because that's not supposed to happen. And that sort of kept happening. And then over this time progressed, sort of my good periods where I wasn't having a flare-up were getting lower and lower. So even when I was well, I started to be not well. So I don't know, literally countless doctors later, I kind of had given up. People had told me, chronic fatigue syndrome, but I was like, no, I have a real illness. I got a virus. I was good. I got infected by something. I don't know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I kind of dismissed that because it didn't sound like a real illness. It sounded like people who were tired. And I had a whole bunch of symptoms, which are 100% typical of chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
But, it's such a stupid name, right? And,
no duh, I feel like crap 24/7. Yeah.
Yeah.
But why?
Look, in Europe, people call it often more myalgic encephalomyelitis. And there's a whole bunch of folk who say that's a different illness. It certainly makes it feel like it sounds like a real illness, whereas chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't, but it's the same diagnostic criteria for most places around the world. Anyway, I basically tried to live with it. And there was actually a period, I don't know how far in, all gets a bit foggy, but maybe 2 years in or 3 years in, well, I kind of suddenly wasn't doing too bad. I kind of forgot about the illness as being a problem. I started doing things again. Almost returned towards the normal for a short period of time, And when it came back, I then started to get other symptoms. So I started to get pain, like fibromyalgia, basically. And I mean, I always had pain from the beginning. In the beginning, when I'd have those flare-ups, even in the very beginning, I'd get like a lot of pain all through my body, But then the pain would go, a couple of days later sort of thing. Whereas now I start to have this persistent pain, and, sensitive to touch and all of that kind of thing. And then I also started to get these tachycardia issues, stand up and, your heart feels like it's going to jump out of your chest. And it's very, very disconcerting. Mm-hmm. And I guess at this stage, I just kind of resolved to live with the illness because I'd been to, I just gave up because not only had I been to, I don't know how many doctors, but I'd been to all kinds of alternative healthcare practitioners. People always say they tried everything. Of course, nobody tries everything, but they try everything they can. They think what they think is everything, right? And there comes a point where you just can't go through that hope and disappointment of someone telling you theory and it's this and some treatment will fix you, and then it doesn't. Like the hope and disappointment roller coaster is almost really worse than just accepting it, Mm-hmm. And it was clear. I mean, obviously nothing was going to work, right? Nothing had worked. Then we moved house. And, when you have to, you find a way to do it. Many of us folk are not the, I'm sick, lie down kind of type, even though sometimes people suggest that, which always makes me giggle because I always think if we were weak, wanting to, lie down and go, oh, poor me, many of us probably wouldn't have gotten ill in the first place. Right? Yeah, I basically just pushed through the move, and then afterwards I crashed real hard. And by real hard, I became bedbound. I lost my ability to communicate. I had 2 little kids, and I spent, I think it was a couple of months, just lying in bed, not doing anything. The only thing I could do is somehow manage to go to the toilet right next to me. That was it. And that was actually not the hardest part of my day. The hardest part of my day was probably saying something to my wife, like speaking. Speaking was worse than going to the toilet. But I remember there were stages where I was literally lying there where I just couldn't move my arms or legs at all. And you felt this heavy feeling in your chest, like laboring on the heart, where like I always wanted to be alone when I had a flare-up. When you feel really horrible, I just want to crawl away into my own cave, away from people, away from sounds, light. I just want to be on my own. But this was so bad that I suddenly didn't want to be my own. So I felt I was dying. It was pretty extreme. And it's interesting because I had a conversation with my wife like 10 years later, and I was like, why didn't you take me to the hospital? Right? like I was like dying, right? And she goes, I wanted to take you to the hospital, but you didn't want me to. You didn't let me. And I had no recollection of any of this, So, yeah. Anyway, there was a conversation we probably should have had earlier than 10 years because I forgot what happened there. Well, my wife was a very caring person, And anyway, so then a couple of months later, I managed to crawl out. And the word crawl is really closer. It's not just like a word. It was literally like a crawl. It was Christmas, and I crawled out and I lay on the couch. And, it's the peak Christmas time for a family, 6 and a 2-year-old. And I was really looking to, I couldn't do anything. Like I couldn't, of course, forget helping with cooking or anything. I couldn't even sit at the table to eat the meal. Right? In fact, I couldn't even eat the meal on the couch. I just lay there. But the low point came when we went to unwrap the presents. Just about, and look, you suck it up, right? Like, no matter how ill you are, you got your little kids. It's Christmas. It's a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. Like, it's the moment, And I remember I didn't physically or mentally or neurological, whatever you want to call it, I didn't have it in me to even crack a smile. I mean, I couldn't even unwrap the present. I couldn't move my arms to unwrap the presents. I just sat there in my lap, and when they were unwrapping it, I couldn't crack a smile or anything. I just sat there like looking at them like a zombie. And I was trying really hard, but I wasn't able to. And that was probably the moment where I said, living with this illness as best as I can may not be an option any longer. Because before I didn't think anything when I was lying in the bed, right? I was just, I don't know, offline. So that's where my turnaround started. Yeah. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks later, I started to get a bit more mobile. I walked out of the bedroom. I spent my day still in my pajamas, right? But I shuffled into the study, and I was sitting there. And I remember this moment. I've talked about it multiple times. The curtains were closed. There was a little crack, and it's the middle of summer in Australia, right? And all I saw, there was a little crack of blue light, like a blue sky that I was looking at. And suddenly, it's almost like a voice went off in my head and said, Dan, you find the answer. Because, I was sick of this idea of treating symptoms, treating this is wrong and that, and the theories. And it's like, well, at this stage, I had actually accepted, obviously, my diagnosis. I think about a year beforehand or a year and a half beforehand, I finally had a Google, one night, when you can't sleep and you're messed up and it's 3:00 in the morning, and you're at the computer looking for answers. You go, okay, well, what is this chronic fatigue syndrome business? And fibromyalgia, all this, because for me, it was just another symptom. I didn't get like fibromyalgia. I was just like, well, I had all this stuff for my virus, and now I've got pain as well. It's not a new illness or the tachycardia, right? And so I Googled and I read actually a story of someone who was ill describing their life. And I was like, oh my God, like this is exactly like me. Like they got all the same symptoms. They got all the same stuff. How you get sick a couple of days later sometimes from the whole thing. It was like 100% me. And I suddenly went, okay, whatever this is obviously, and that was like sometime before this. I don't know how long, a year and a half before, something like this. And then so I started on this journey of trying to work out. And all I wanted to do is find out what actually caused the illness.
Of course. I think we're all like that. We all want to know what triggered it. Why was I different?
But I think many people just want to know, like, how to get rid of it or how to get rid of the symptoms or what treatments work. But I was like, because I have a science background, and I worked sort of in the engineering space. I was a physicist previously. And then I had transitioned to the financial services industry, mainly as a number cruncher. And so, for me, it was all about the logic of what is the root mechanism here that's broken. And I've seen that movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Lorenzo's Oil. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it was a movie, an old movie. I don't know when it made it, maybe the 80s. It had Nick Nolte in it. And it's about this Italian family who had a boy with this illness, and no one could help him around the world. And they ended up going to all these biochemists and trying to work it out themselves. In the end, they found some oil that this boy needed in his body, and they were able to kind of cure him. But by that time, he was actually still very ill. They couldn't fix him because of the damage of all these years. But it was that story, and I thought, maybe a layperson maybe can find an answer. Right. And obviously the alternative isn't working. I didn't want to go back to a doctor or an integrative doctor or functional medicine doctor or naturopath or any kind of treatment, because I'm like, it makes no sense. Like, why are you fixing something if you don't know what's broken? Yeah. So what I did is I just looked at all the dysfunctions, that we know. Like, how do we create energy? How does that work? And why do I go into a shopping center and suddenly go buy myself a piece of sushi and then douse it in so much soy sauce that it looks like a soup and I look like I'm a mentally ill person? Like, I go, who does that? Like, why do I do that? Right? And all these kind of weird things. And I started to go and I started to go to medical universities, to their libraries, looking at papers. And it was a bit ridiculous because not only did I have brain fog and what have you, but I couldn't understand anything. Like, I'd read it like a paragraph, like, I only know 40% of the word and or are not enough to explain what's going on in the sentence. You know what I mean? That was a pretty rough trial.
Yeah.
And when I told my wife, what I was planning to do, she was like, yes. She just looked at me with this confidence, right in the eyes, immediately. She goes, yes, I know you will. And I remember that moment just going, what have I done? I think a part of me just wanted her to go, why are you being ridiculous? And just go settle down. You know what I mean? Anyway, so yeah, that's where I was. Mm-hmm. That's where I was.
So that moment on the couch, when you decided like things are going to change, what changed in that moment? Like, how did you go from not being able to move and even smile to I've changed my mind and now I'm going to start walking within 4 weeks?
Well, to be very frank here, I don't think I did anything to start walking in 4 weeks, mm-hmm. right? I don't put it down to anything that I did. I think it was just a factor of time. I mean, I hadn't decided what I was going to do. I don't think I had a lot of brain power to really think or decide much. I just remember having that moment going, this is no longer palatable. Yeah. This is not workable. If I can't even crack a smile whilst they're opening a present, that's as far as I got there. And for the next, whatever it was, 4 weeks, I don't think I did anything. It was similar to the 4 weeks beforehand, or the 8 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever it was. But I just basically just let time go by and I felt a little bit better. But I wasn't doing great when I came out.
Okay.
I was still pajama bound. Pajama bound tells the story, right? It tells you it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. So you started doing your own research and you really, like, if you were looking at biochemistry and, going into like your physics background, you were really going to the root, like how our cells communicate with each other.
I looked at all these things. I'm like, well, people are low in magnesium. I'm like, why are they low in magnesium? Like, well, where do you use magnesium? And why could you be low? Like, I was just doing this kind of thinking. What regulates your magnesium and all this kind of thing. And one of the real telltale signs was my alcohol intolerance. Yeah. I have any kind of alcohol. Like, I'd have one beer at a barbecue or something like this. And like 2 days later, boom, I'm out. I'm full flare up. Maybe not even 2 days, right? Sometimes sooner. I'm like, how can it be from one beer? Like, I've got German blood in me. It's like, it's got to be right.
Same.
Yeah. And so I go, well, why would I have alcohol intolerance? And that actually led me to my first, where I thought, okay, I think I've worked out what is the problem. I was wrong, but I thought I had worked it out. So I looked at how alcohol is metabolized and it goes through different, becomes different biochemical, different compounds. And one of them is acetaldehyde, which is toxic. It's a poison, right? But it's only a short transition because then that gets metabolized into something else. And so one of the things I thought, this is what it must be. If you get acetaldehyde poisoning, how that would impact you. And I thought, maybe there's a genetic problem. I know a lot of Asian people have this, where they are unable to produce acetaldehyde dehydrogenases. And I thought, yeah, that must be it. But of course, I was completely wrong. And it didn't explain all of the other stuff,
Right.
So then I had to ditch it. And I kept just looking and studying and learning. And then what kind of happened is I started to see that, I kept going, well, what causes that? And there's this, and what causes that? And what causes that? And at the end, I got to the brain in my investigations. But no matter which route I took, 80% of the time got me to the brain. And the other 20%, I started to wonder if there was a different secondary connection. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I looked at magnesium, blah, blah, blah. I go, well, how's that regulated? What about sodium and potassium? These are, of course, all regulated through your adrenal glands to the mineral corticoids, which is, of course, controlled by your brain. Yes, I mean, there are all other kinds of feedback mechanisms and all this kind of thing, but ultimately, it came back to the brain. And I looked at and then there was all these neurological dysfunctions. Yes, like I couldn't take sound, or I couldn't take lights, or I couldn't take or pain, or the weird sense of smell. I developed a sense of smell like a bloodhound. When I open up the chicken in my kitchen, you've got that foil on top, or you pierce it, right? The moment I open it, my dog comes straight running into the kitchen. I was just about the same, right? Yeah. Like the moment when my wife would open pierce that chicken pack, I could tell her how fresh the chicken was sitting in the living room. I mean, how weird is that? That's not normal, right? That's not by the way, they can't do that anymore.
Yeah, but that's that limbic part of the brain.
yeah, that's right. Because it's that protection mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And all of that, it just kept leading me to the brain until eventually I saw another thing. Funny things would happen during this period. Yeah, so I'd looked at all these different strange neurological symptoms, and all these strange coincidences started to happen. Like I one night, I was sitting in front of the TV, and this was very early on in my research, actually. And this man came in. It was unknown medical mysteries. And this guy was talking about all these strange symptoms he had, like salt cravings and this and that. And it sounded like me, like it was just so spot on. And it turns out he had Addison's disease, right? Mm-hmm. So he had everything I had, except he went orange, which I never did. And that was sort of interesting, and I go, I don't have that, but there must be a similarity, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much overlap. And then I saw another one later on in my research that started to talk about how fear works and how that part of the brain is, all these bits of information would suddenly sort of come to me out of the blue. I've never met anyone with the illness or these illnesses, if you want to call it like that, during my whole 7 years of illness. Also, when I recovered, in something like a 6-week period, I think it was, I met like 5 different people.
Yeah.
It was like bizarre. I'm like, what's going on? So it's funny how things were sort of coming together. But yeah, I basically worked out that this must be a brain dysfunction. And the way I can really explain to most people is it should be obvious. Like this shouldn't be something we have to research and work out, and a lame person like me, because basically I say, if somebody comes to you and they've got this many symptoms, there can only be 2 things. One, they're a mental patient who are making stuff up, or hypochondria or something like this, or they've got autonomic dysfunction.
Don't those 2 things overlap anyways?
Well, it seems that often we get identified as just being the first.
Right, yeah.
But the point is, like, it just makes no sense for this many things to be wrong with one person. Yeah, I mean, how can you have so many illnesses? Who could be this unlucky? Yeah, this many symptoms. People will say, "Oh, no, I've got hypothyroidism. Oh, and I have this problem, and I have this," and they think they've got like a dozen diagnoses, right? But they don't. They have one diagnosis.
Well, that's how the medical community treats it. You go to one specialist for this, and then you go to the other specialist for that, and they never speak to each other. And so everyone thinks in this very like pigeonhole way. And then you collect all these diagnoses and nobody ever figures it out because they're only looking in one place.
Everyone's just got their own little thing they do, their own little niche, their own little sausage factory. So they start to really piece everything together. It started to piece together all of the symptoms. It started to piece together why some people have some symptoms and not other symptoms. It started to explain why some people get ill after this, like an accident or a vaccination or a marriage breakup.
Yeah.
Or childbirth. I mean, like these things seem totally unrelated, yes, but it started to explain that. And then later on, as I actually not only discovered that there were people who were ill, but also people who had recovered, well, including myself at that stage, I realized that people recovered in all different ways. Well, hang on a sec, how does this make any sense? If you all have the same illness, how can one person do something completely different than another to recover? Or how can one person do the same thing as someone who did something to recover and not have success? Like this makes no sense normally. But once we had a deeper understanding of how this works, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And so I felt when I first pieced this all together, I felt, okay, this makes a whole lot of sense. I felt 100% certain that this is what's going on. Maybe 3% certain I was ever going to get healthy again, but 100% certain that this was at least the explanation. Yeah, and then I started to work on my recovery. And it was interesting because it was very difficult to do because I just didn't imagine that I could be well again.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't connect with that possibility. But now it was like I felt so confident that this is the cause. I thought theoretically maybe you can change this. I struggled to articulate that even. But so I thought, okay, well, I have to try. And so I started doing lots of things. Yeah. I actually re-engaged with another doctor again, which was surprising because I was so burnt out on doctors. Yeah. I remember at one stage, probably before I got to the bedbound low, but I was very ill, very, very ill. My wife took me to a doctor, and I remember I couldn't even talk anymore. I couldn't even advocate for myself. I just sat there like a zombie, and my wife was telling the story. It was the first time because normally you're always like, oh, this happened, this, and you want to make sure they understand everything. I remember this lady doctor. She looked at me and goes, "Oh, I've seen this before. Don't worry, we can get you fixed." And I actually just burst out into tears as a grown man, because I thought this is just ridiculous, they're getting these promises of hope again, and then short time after that, I ended up being that completely bedbound before that Christmas, and so I didn't think I would go back to a doctor. But once I understood this, I realized that even the treatments that may not have worked in the past had the potential to work as the root dysfunction would start to normalize.
Yeah.
And in fact, the root dysfunction normalizing could very much be affected by having the dysfunctions in my body treated. So suddenly symptom treatment had their place. Yeah. And so this doctor kind of helped me. He talked to me a lot about diet, which I was like, diet, Seriously, I'm ill and you're talking to me about whether I eat, how many carrots I eat. Like I was ignorant, because, all my beer-swilling, pizza-eating friends, they weren't sick.
Yeah.
And my diet wasn't that bad, but anyway, I had some help, with the gut and so on. And eventually I recovered. Took somewhere 12 to 18 months, I would say.
Have you had to give up coffee for health reasons? Maybe because of the stress it was putting on your adrenals, maybe because it was messing with your sleep, maybe because you felt terrible after drinking it, or maybe because you were told coffee had mold on the beans and you needed to stay away from mold. Well, what if I told you there's an organic, mycotoxin-free, quality coffee that contains reishi spores or Ganoderma lucidum? Ganoderma lucidum helps to modulate your immune system, adapt to stress, balance hormones, and doesn't give you the jitters or shakes like regular coffee used to. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's called King Coffee by the company Organo. And King Coffee came into my life when I was struggling with chronic hives, full body eczema, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hadn't drank coffee in years because it made me feel anxious, shaky, and clammy. So I had no expectations that drinking King Coffee would be any different. However, I decided to give it a try after seeing lots of amazing practitioners talk about the benefits of reishi online. I tried a 7-day sample and the chronic hives were gone by day 5. I was in shock. After that, I dove into the research on reishi and found that there are over 3,000 peer-reviewed PubMed clinical trials using reishi Ganoderma as an intervention. The company Organo also has a patent protected on their harvesting process. They double crack open the spore shells, which makes them up to 80% more potent than the body of the reishi, which is usually used in other reishi products. This also makes the spores 90% more bioavailable for your body to use. If you would like to try King Coffee, visit thehealerrevolution.myorganogold.com, or for a 7-day trial, you can check out my link tree on my Instagram at Amanda Panacea. With your recovery, who were like the people you found that really helped you work on the brain and like neuroplasticity? Like, what were your resources that you came across?
I didn't really think to look for resources on that because I thought this was my own sort of weird harebrained idea.
Okay.
So I sought help with doctor, and that was pretty much it. What did happen is very late in my recovery, I started to have a look around, and I found other people who had mentioned this theory. Like, I never saw this before because, when you're not looking for it, how do you find this? Mm-hmm. Yes. But then I go, well, autonomic dysfunction, hypothalamus, and I started Googling this kind of stuff. And I found that there were doctors who had been doing this since the 70s.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who'd said this, but they got kind of dismissed and what have you. So then I'm like, it wasn't quite the same as me, but let's just say there was a 70% overlap. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, talk about reinventing the wheel, Actually, after I had published my book and I tried to spread the word, this is a year or two later, people go, oh, well, do you realize there's other people in the world who are saying what you're saying? Or similar things, not quite the same, but it's very similar. And they said, oh, have you heard of like the Optimum Health Clinic? Have you heard of the Gupta program? And I'm like, wow, have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? All these different things. Have you, Dr. Goldstein, have you heard of this? And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I heard of some of these things. There's so many of them. I heard some of them very late in my recovery. And when I finally discovered them, I was like, whoa, this is exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah. It gave me a real confidence booster, because you just feel like you're being a bit crazy with your own delusional ideas. And, I'm not a doctor and all this. But then you start seeing other people and you find all this stuff and you're like, wow, this may really be possible, Mm-hmm. And I think that really helped me from the 70, 80% to the 100%. Also, I never sort of took advantage of any such resources. Just hearing that there were some people who said the same thing, it gave me a lot of confidence.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible that you came to all of these conclusions, like with no health or mental health background, because I'd heard of your program as well. It's listed on, if you like Google like neuroplasticity, or if you Google what programs are similar to DNRS, like your program is mentioned. So that's how I heard of it.
Yeah. Well, and look at ANS REWIRE is quite different than some of these approaches. Mm-hmm. My approach was different for myself. I'm not saying that those approaches aren't helpful or that people don't recover, because one of the first things I did, first I published my book after I published my book, I gave away 5,000 copies for free. And I went into the forums and I said, oh, look, I had the same illness as you guys, and, I managed to recover and blah, 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 blah. And I thought they'd be excited. I'd never been to a forum before because, remember, I had a real illness. I was a bit slow in the uptake. But even, like I said, when I accepted it, I don't know why I didn't do these things. I don't know. It's strange, I actually don't have an answer. But anyway, for the first time in my life, I went into one of these forums and I was excited to share what I'd learned. In fact, I think this was before I published the book, or maybe just before. And I was shocked because I was suddenly vehemently attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And this is quite normal, I realize now, but at the time I was like, well, why are you attacking me? Like, I'm saying, I found something to help me and I'm just trying to tell you about it. You didn't have this illness. You had a different illness. You're making it up. You're a scammer. You're trying to make money out of sick people. I'm like, what money? It's like, I'm not making any money. It's like, I don't think I've even published a book, right? And even when you publish a book, you don't make any money out of publishing books, right? Not unless you're like, I don't know, some people maybe, but not the vast majority of people. And I'm like, this is so strange,
Yeah. Well, especially in this community when people are dealing with that chronic conditions and diagnosis, so many people now are just really latching on to their diagnosis and their label, and it's becoming their identity, and it validates their pain. And so people are just, terrified to let go of that. And a lot of people unfortunately struggle. I mean, I definitely did too, with who are they without that? So if your whole life is healing or helping other people heal, or maybe you are making money off recommending products and working with people, who are you if you don't have that illness, or your past traumas, your pain are no longer validated? And it's a spiritual journey to go through as well.
I'd hear those words all the time when I started to do the recovery interviews. So, when I did the book, the first thing I wanted to do is because remember, suddenly I met all these people who had been ill, right? That was the first witness. Then I met people who'd recovered, all over the place. These people are everywhere. And I thought it was super rare. I didn't even know anyone had my illness, let alone I was surrounded by people who had recovered. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But again, many people you'll speak to go, I spoke to a doctor who's a great doctor who helps people in a very positive way, people who are diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And he used the words, it's unheard of for someone to recover, and I just couldn't engage in the conversation with him because it's so far, realities are so far apart. And when people's realities are challenged, they often react very negatively. Yeah. And I think the issue is when people are ill with this group of illnesses, first, no one believes you. Right. And then you go through all these promises that you're going to get recovered with this treatment or that treatment. People spend more money, effort, and emotional energy than they can afford. And it never leads anywhere, right? Never leads anywhere. And then, so you resign yourself to being ill. And then someone comes along and says, oh, this is what it is, and you can recover. Well, that's kind of putting a real onus on you. Okay, so what I haven't done enough to recover then. Yeah. It's really offensive in a way. So I get why people react like that. It could have been me. It could have been me. I was pretty bitter and twisted and very cynical. Yeah. And people would think, oh, you should try this. And I'd just be like, don't even talk to me about anything. What the heck do you know? I've tried everything. And I go, when I see 1,000 people with exactly my condition who have been to have that treatment and we can document that works for everyone, I'll turn up. And until then, why don't you just go away? Not necessarily the most helpful attitude, but that's kind of where I was at.
Yeah, I think everyone can resonate with that who's been there. Yeah. So when did you decide to create a program? When were you this is my calling, this is what I need to do? Well,
it was some years later. So what happened basically, I started just to do advocacy work. So I wrote my book, I published my book, I started the website CFS Unravelled, and notice that I call it CFS Unravelled. I think it's kind of insightful in my story. I didn't call it Fibromyalgia Unravelled, right? Mm-hmm. Or POTS Unravelled. In fact, even the word POTS, I don't even mention it in a lot of my program because I just could keep looking at these things as a symptom. Like I had 100 symptoms.
Yeah.
One symptom. The fibromyalgia wasn't like, oh, I've got a real illness. They go, yeah, no, I've been ill already for like 4 years before the pain set in. Yeah, I basically have been doing this advocacy work, doing interviews. And at that time, I don't think anyone had done that. And I found all these people who'd recovered, and I interviewed them how they did it. And I'd hoped that people would sort of start to see how that worked, even though people had different approaches, and that they would see the common themes. And I started to help people privately. I was working my day job, and then at night, I was just having meetings with people or stuff like that. It was all done pro bono. I wasn't a business. It wasn't money. I didn't make $1 out of, books. You don't make much money out of books. And then you just paid for the website, basically,
Yeah.
So it was really just it was just a passion. The transformation to get your life back is not something that anyone can have an inkling about unless they've gone through what that really means. And, for anyone who hasn't been ill like this, I remember running. I've never been a runner. I'm still not a runner. But I remember running. I'd been running for a couple of months, like, half an hour running, 40, 50 minutes running, just because I could. It was like it was just a novelty. And I remember I hadn't had symptoms in many months, and I was running on a sunny day, and I had this thing of, what if I could be a well person? Like, imagine yourself being a well person. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't imagine myself as anything except broken and ill and vulnerable, even when I was well. So people say, oh, you have to imagine this before you get well. Well, I couldn't imagine it after I was well. Yeah. So for me, it had a huge impact emotionally, and that's why I was helping people, and I was supporting people by emails. I was in comments, all this kind of thing. And I got used to the abuse. If I went anywhere talking about this, and then I remember going also to like some support groups, and it was so weird. I came and I spoke to them. I shared my story. I gave my explanation, all of this, and in the end, I just saw a bunch of dead, staring eyes looking at me. And then afterward, the talk, they'd come up to me and say, oh, did you hear that there's something to go with methylation? I'm like, oh God, like you didn't hear anything I said,
Yeah.
It was just kind of like bewildering. But what happened is I kept getting calls by people saying, oh, can you get us more resources? Well, how did you do this brain training? And how did you do this? And, it's kind of hard to just explain, because brain training is about education. And the way I approach neuroplasticity is a multilateral approach, a tailored approach. It's not about doing a set of mental exercises or procedures. I'm not knocking those, because that kind of approach, like you mentioned with other programs, works great for many people. But I recognize that the autonomic nervous system actually responds to everything in the body. It doesn't just respond to mental things or psychological things or emotional things. It responds to your blood sugar. It responds to what's happening in your digestive system, right? If you look at pain perception of how that works, this is all a little bit more complex. And so they kept saying, we need more reason, we need more help. And I for years, so I thought about doing a program. I just go, it's too hard. I couldn't even sell any of the books. How am I going to invest the amount of energy and time that it takes to create what I envisage? And then one day, I guess it got to a point where I thought, what if I get hit by a bus? How would I feel not having done it? Do I think I can do this? Do I think it can be sustainable? I go, no. I've been trying to sell this idea for nothing. How am I going to sell this idea for something, right? And the amount of resources it's going to take to do this, it's like, where am I going to find this? But then I thought, if I get hit by that bus, how would I feel about not doing it? How would I feel about robbing the world of this information? And I thought, well, that became unpalatable. So I was a bit between a rock and a hard place, but somewhere along the line, the pain of not doing it became too much. So I took the plunge. Awesome. And, it's kind of tricky. The program is 250,000 words. I'm not sure if you understand how difficult that is even to edit. Because by the time you get to word 212,000, you don't remember what you said at word 53,206, right? So to edit that multiple times and then to record it and then to edit it and video process it, and it was a monumental task. And I created the program, and a few people enrolled in it, and it went from there.
Yeah. So what does your program entail? You mentioned like neuroplasticity, which would be top down. And then do you also incorporate like bottom up, somatic experiencing and vagus nerve work and things like that?
Yeah. So these are really helpful things you mentioned here. I have no formal training in such things, and they're not in the program, but I do encourage people to look at those things. Mm-hmm. I would say the core of the program is really, first of all, in order to affect neuroplasticity, one of the things is we need to actually do it. Like anything, like a heart medicine that works in 100% of people, doesn't work if you don't put it in your mouth, right? With neuroplasticity, this is more of an issue, right? If I went to your great-grandfather, if he had a stroke and he went to your physiotherapist, who said, "Oh, listen, mate, we can teach you how to walk again." And he goes, "What are you talking about? I went to my doctor. It's just that part of my brain's dead. Nobody can walk after a stroke. If I lost it, it's gone." He goes, no, we can teach you. All right, look, this is what we're going to do. You just stand here and look, see? Now, I want you to think you're moving my foot, that you're moving your foot. Go and do it. And then the physio takes the foot and shuffles it along the floor. Your great-grandpa would have rolled his eyes so hard, he would have done himself an injury. He would go, "And this is bull dust. I'm not coming back here to these charlatans." Right? He's moving my foot, trying to make me think I did it. Like this is going to work. The doctor says this part of my brain's dead. No one's ever started to walk again after a stroke. Okay? So you can see that a therapy cannot work if you don't understand the science behind it so that you persist with it. Mm-hmm. So that's the huge part of the program. And for many people, they say that is one of the biggest part of the value of it. The next layers we look at how is the autonomic nervous system triggered physiologically? Because people trigger their nervous system all the time. And by triggering it, this constant triggering doesn't allow positive neuroplasticity to occur very easily. Yeah, because you keep making your brain do the wrong thing. And it's triggered through numerous mechanisms in the body. So we say, okay, well, how do we address these mechanisms? It can be all kinds of things, everything from your blood sugar to how your gut is functioning to your physical activity, right? Everyone knows that with chronic fatigue syndrome. But it can be other things too, right? Temperature and even barometric pressure, right? So we go, well, the last two are probably, especially the last one, is probably more of a neurological phenomenon than physiological. But where do you draw the line? So we understand all of these things, and we understand how we now need to put certain things in place to manage these things, and why many strategies that are very good, healthy things that people do in the world to be extremely healthy are terrible and detrimental for people with this group of illnesses. So even something good is bad. If you don't understand how your body is dysfunctioning, mm-hmm. you might make those mistakes. And I see people do that all the time. Then we start to say, okay, well, now how do we train the brain? And we look at a number of approaches. Some of these you might, I coined what I call the rewire process, but it's very flexible because the way somebody's mind works is different, very different. Some people are kinesthetic, some people are visual, some people are auditory. So we have certain preferences. And we have different cultural backgrounds. There's lots of reasons. So we talk about affecting the base arousal in the brain. But one of the things that I speak about that probably not every doctor would agree with or every neurologist is I separate arousal in the brain from arousal in the body. And those things are normally considered to be one. So we talk about bringing the arousal in the brain down. And then we train with the rewire in a number of ways. It can be Some of it is what you might call mental, right? A bit like what you do with drug rehabilitation, right? You mentally go, I'm going to move my leg. But a lot of it is what I have termed as somatoneurological. So the somatoneurological approach is to retrain the brain through the body. If you look at the work of Professor Ledoux, who used to work at New York State University, I don't know if he's still there or not, and he looked at how these different centers in the brain operate. One of the things he found was that the body will actually the brain will look at the body in order to make an assessment of threat. And so we re-educate the body through the way with which we engage in our body, our breathing, and all of that, as a way to also affect neuroplasticity. So it's a multilateral approach. Now the question is that better?
I would say yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and there would be many folk who would agree with you, and those would be the folk who've tried other neuroplasticity programs, which are more mind-based, who didn't succeed, and then came into my program and then recovered very easily. But, I will tell you that there will be people who have gone into my program, struggle to recover, and then go onto a very like a narrow approach, like maybe 15% of what's in my program, and they're recovered with that. And the reason is it's not compatible to do the physical strategies if you're seeking treatment and some of the neuroplasticity work. They're not compatible. So we seek to educate people and help them to manage that. And we say, not everyone needs to do both. We say basically do what you need to do to make progress. And be flexible in your thinking of what you do here. But when people try to do too much at once, sometimes that can be actually unhelpful. Yeah,
that makes sense.
So sometimes less is more. So that's how the program came to be.
Nice. It sounds really interesting. I'm going to have to check it out. So, question: do you now believe that you can fully recover?
Yes, well, I know you can fully recover, but I guess what's changed is the extent of that belief, to be honest. I mean, myself, in terms of seeing myself as being well again, that may have taken a couple of years after being well. Like, I was really mentally messed up, jaded, Like, I was so broken. I was broken. I'm like, just because I'm fully well doesn't mean I'm not going to be well. I'm not going to be well next week. You know what I mean? It's like, I thought of myself as broken a very long time, right? But once you can actually have big stresses in your life, big negative experiences, physiological stresses, all this crazy stuff that would have made you sick, and it doesn't. Your confidence in your recovery grows.
Yeah, your resilience builds as time goes.
Absolutely. And look, one of the things I guess that has changed a lot is when I first started to do this work, well, even when I started ANS REWIRE, which is now 6 years ago, I think, when it was first opened, I guess your confidence grows over time. For instance, I don't really seek validation on my explanation. I don't even know if I can call it my explanation anymore. Even the American College of Rheumatology now lists fibromyalgia as a neurological disease as opposed to a mystery. World Health Organization had done that with CFS back in the 80s, I think, right? But some people still make it out to be a mystery, because what people want is they want an easy fix-it pill. That is what they want. That's why we get all this symptom treatment, because people just want it easy, right? And recovery from this illness is an individual journey, right? And the program is there to teach you that individual journey. So, I've probably had a bit of some confidence boosting sort of events that made me sort of lose that concern about having come up with this. I know there was the world's top fibromyalgia researcher, one of the top researchers, won the International Fibromyalgia Researcher Award. She was giving a lecture to this group, and someone suddenly called out and said, because she was talking about how the autonomic nervous system impacts fibromyalgia and how that works in pain sensing and the barrier reflex and, all of these details and different neurological, different centers in the brain. And someone goes, isn't that exactly what Dan Neuffer is saying? And she goes, who the heck is Dan Neuffer? So they've contacted me, and I've got like an association with this university now. And, subsequently I've had many of the top doctors around the world are now recommending the program as well. Researchers are recommending the program. It's being used now in over 60 countries. And as a result of that, I've seen a lot of people's experiences. I still do pro bono work. Don't tell anyone. But I try to limit that. I don't have that much time to do one-on-one work. I try and have the program speak for itself, and I try and have people engage with other healthcare professionals. That's really one of the core themes of the program, is working with other healthcare professionals. But one of the things I've seen is that, in the beginning, I would have said, can everyone recover? Well, I would have said maybe not everyone. And I say, well, what about a person that's been ill, like who's old? What about an older person? Mm-hmm. Well, neuroplasticity, we're most plastic when we're young. And what about a person that's been sick for 30 years? And I'm thinking, I couldn't even think of the possibility of my thinking of myself as a well person, like for 2 years, after being well. I don't know, how can someone do this after 30 years? How can they train their brain? I would have been very doubtful. What about someone who's in an abuse situation? What about somebody who's got severe mental illness? How can they do that? I've seen people recover where I would have put my hand in fire. There's no chance. Now, I didn't say that to them, of course.
Yeah.
But I can, and I can give you a intellectual argument, why they can't recover. And I can talk to you about, the whole neurology behind it, the psychology behind it. I have a really solid case why they can't recover, but they recovered. So that's probably been the biggest thing that has changed in my experience is I never take recovery off the table anymore.
Yeah.
For anyone, right?
Yeah.
No matter how often they've tried something, whether my program, another program, every doctor, what their situation, I don't take it off the table because I have seen it all. Seriously.
That's incredible.
I saw a person, I don't know how this person is doing now, but I spoke to her when she'd gone from 0 or like 5 or 10% recovered to 70% recovered when at the point I spoke to her with my program. This is a homeless person.
Oh, wow.
Now, many questions should come up in your mind. Like, forget how does a homeless person do all the things I talk about in the program, but how does a homeless person access my program? It's an online program. And where does a homeless person get the money to go into the program? Not that the program is very expensive, but for a homeless person.
Yeah.
Like, seriously? I've seen people with schizophrenia recover. I have seen people in domestic abuse recover. I've seen people with chronic anxiety and depression disorder recover. I have seen people who'd had their thyroid cancer and thyroids removed. I've seen people who are bedbound recover. I've seen people who are in their 70s recover, people who have been recovered for 30 and 40 years.
You're really selling this program for me. I now need to do your program myself.
I'm not saying that it's not just that the program is not like this magic panacea cure. Yeah. Right? and like, I'm not saying, everyone goes to this program is just going to recover. No, that's not what I mean. But I guess what I've learned is, these stories here are probably through my program because, that's mainly the people I speak to these days, right? But even early on, or when I've spoken to other people, I've seen people who recover in all kinds of situations.
Yeah, definitely.
And, it's just inspiring, and inspiring. And I tell you, people who get these illnesses are a different class of people. Like, they really are. I speak to the most amazing people in the world. Like, sometimes they get a little bit giddy when they speak to me because they feel, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity and all this. But I tell you what, I'm the one who's giddy at the end of the talk, right? Because they're just awe-inspiring, and what they achieve against all odds, like how they come out of abuse situations, and it's just mind-boggling. Seriously, it is absolutely mind-boggling. I could talk about it a long time, but it's
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm also really inspired hearing your story, and I feel like the work that you're doing, without charging a lot, and a really affordable program, and then all the pro bono work you've done, and your book. I mean, I feel like you're a real heavy hitter in the chronic illness recovery space. So I'm so appreciative to have you on today.
Well, thanks for having me on. Spread the message. I spend all my time trying to help folk, not marketing the program very well. And unfortunately, people can't find it. Google doesn't say, "Oh, CFS," or fibromyalgia. Yeah, what you need to do is the ANS REWIRE program. So people just don't find out. Virtually all of my people who enroll in the program, it's all bad word of mouth. They go, "Oh yeah, I met someone who recovered there, blah blah blah," and so, and I'm like, I never find out about all these people who recover with my program. I'm like, I hear all these stories, or this, or yeah, I met this person who recovered. I'm like, who are they? I don't know them. It's just like I speak to a lot of people in my program, but a lot of people never speak to me, and they recover, and I never find out.
Well, maybe the next step in your journey is hiring like a marketing team.
Yeah, maybe. It's an interesting thing. I mean, it's the world that we live in. I mean, the logical thing is you get sick, you should go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you then what to do and how you get better, right? I mean, we all think of it like that. Or most of us think of it, at least early on in our life. Yeah, I mean, people think we go to a doctor and we just get well that way. But, when it comes to many health conditions, it's much more complex than that. And it involves things that we do. And I think a long time ago, people recognized the impact on how they engage with life and how that could impact their recovery. When people used to get sick, they used to go to a convalescent home. You come back from the war and you'd sit in some old English mansion, with a blanket across your legs, and you chill out for like 3-4 months, right? But now when people get COVID or something, and if they're not in a gym on day 9, they almost have a panic attack.
Yeah, good point.
Oh my God, now it's like 2 weeks and I feel like I can't do supersets. And they start to panic. And we have such a warped sense of what is healthy and what is normal. It is so far removed from the reality in nature that anyone who wants to live a healthy life they almost have to think of themselves as living some strange, lesser life. Yeah. And I think, that's
a whole nother topic we could go down for a long time.
Yeah. So, look, I'm blessed to do what I do. What keeps me going, despite all the challenges, is just, the feedback I get from people. And, hopefully this will inspire some people to either to recover if they have a chronic illness, or to keep going if they are seeking to help others. What I can tell you is that people who recover from this group of chronic illnesses that I deal with, I actually discourage them to do any work in the space of any sort for a couple of years at least.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think this is an important thing. You need to have a new identity, a solid identity of being a well person. But what I will say is whatever chronic illness or challenge you've had, if you go to help other people, you will have an insight and an ability to show empathy that nobody else will have unless they've been in that same position. And as long as you practice your self-care and you always put yourself first, then you can make a wonderful contribution to the world. And, making it sustainable can be a bit of a challenge. It's always an ongoing challenge, but I'd say go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. That's the theme of this podcast. So that wraps us up perfectly. So it was just amazing getting to know you and listening to your story. I'm so thankful to have had you on the podcast. If you could let everyone know where to find your program, hopefully this will reach more people and help them in their recovery.
Yeah, look, the first step is don't rush into the program, is what I would say. Is that I encourage everyone to watch the first 4 free intro lessons. They summarize what it's about, and you can find that at ANS REWIRE. That's ANS for Autonomic Nervous System.com. And then, if you need a little bit more convincing or you're not certain, I wrote the book, CFS Unravelled. Here's a copy. This one here. You can get that at all the online bookstores. You can also check it out on cfsunraveled.com. It's Unravelled spelled with 2 L's. And that's also where I have all my advocacy work, interviews with people I've recovered. I have some blogs there. I have a podcast there. So these are some things that you can also check out.
Perfect. And I will add all that to the show notes as well, so people can easily find it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Daniel, I am just so happy to have had this conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and all the inspiration that you shared with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been really great to meet you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Sorry, my camera died.
That's okay. I remember what you look like.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, leave a comment, anything that can help get this information out to more people who may be struggling. You can also find me online at thehealerrevolution.com or amandapanacea.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at amandapanacea. Thank you so much for joining the revolution.